Hi, so got the little project I'm going to work on, which is, I'm not going to film everything on this, I'm just going to kind of drift in and out as I go through certain stages. So I've got this pretty old Shakespeare Mach 2 Boron float rod, which is a bit of an iconic rod, I think from the 1980s, maybe 1990s, not sure. Kind of made famous by the likes of Dave Harrell, who referenced it a few times as being his go-to rod for all of his river fishing, so it was on all of his old videos, which are now available on YouTube and so on. So I've actually got a couple of these, and one of them's absolutely trashed to the extent of where I've stripped it 100% down to rebuild it one day. Haven't got to it yet. This one was alright. I hadn't used it for ages, and then last year when I was doing a bit of fishing on the River Thames, my sort of go-to rod was actually being worked on by somebody, and kind of picked this thing up to use and actually realised, had a bit of a reminder on what a great rod it really is. But a bit of an old style, got a few faults. One of the things is it's got a really, really long handle, which meant if I sort of had a real big piece coming down, caught in the bank, caught in my clothing. Sometimes I wear this thing called a bait apron, which is where I've got like a big pocket, put bait in there so it's easy to just reach in. Found I was getting tangled up in that. So I used to move the reel down a little bit, and sort of was more likely to have the reel sat here than what I was the more typical sort of further forward. So always had this idea that I was going to upgrade this a little bit with a modern reel fitting, which I'm going to do. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm also going to work on it so that the handle is going to be a little bit shorter, means I'm going to have an empty piece here, which I'm just going to fill, I think, with a bit of whipping, and I'm going to put a hook keeper on, and yeah, modern style reel fitting here. And I wasn't going to, but now I've decided I'm going to strip all of the rings off it, the eyes off it. I always remember watching Dave Harrell's videos, and he used to talk about the fact that he liked the fact that the rings, most of the rings except for the tip and the butt section, are just wire, don't actually have any lining in there. That was always down to being so that they were light. I don't know if that's true or not. It is a heavy rod when you compare it with a modern day rod. But I've sort of looked at this. It's an older rod. Where the person I got it from is actually an ex-Shakespeare Superteam guy. Was sort of known as not being a particularly guy to look after his gear. He's a friend of my father's, and if you can see here, older style, I'm pretty sure this isn't epoxy but more the varnish which has been used to cover over the whippings, the original whippings. Really nicely done, but you can see they've got this yellowing and they've cracked, which I think is where, you know, pressure's been put on the rings. They've moved side by side. The butt ring, which I've actually taken off before I started making this video, was even worse. So I've started stripping it down. I'm going to strip the whole thing down, and then put new rings on there. I've got these really nice, they're called Seymo RDX rings from Guides and Blanks, when they're supposed to be really, really lightweight. They are actually double-legged. I could have got single-legged. Thought about it, decided to go with doubles simply because I think there's a little bit of just extra support, just getting them in and out of a rod bag or whatever. I generally don't sort of wrap my fishing gear in cotton wool when I'm actually using it. It's not that I don't look after it, but I do view them as being tools. So figured that these would be a little bit more hard wearing, less likely to bend, get torn off, whatever, than the single legs. We'll see how I go. So I've taken the butt ring off, just going to work through taking these off. I'm actually just very simply working through, got my little I think 300 watt heat gun, applying gentle heat, just kind of nicking with a razor blade and unravelling. Once I've got the section cleaned up, I'm going to start thinking about the handle. I'll probably cut back in there and just sort of talk a little bit more about how I'm going to do things and what I'm thinking. Okay, so I've stripped these two rings off. Interesting sort of thing actually was I found it very difficult to know where the varnish finish that was on the whippings and the actual finish of the rod blank, where sort of one ended and the other began. So I ended up being quite careful, and I found that even by using heat and scraping, I still had a few ridges and a few high points, and I actually ended up doing some quite careful scraping, really just to get high points off to make the whipping go on well. And then I finished it off with some wet and dry, just really fine, just to try and get it as smooth as possible. I'm pretty confident that by the time I've whipped this up, it'll be all right. And where it's not, then I can always put a bit of finish over it. I've got been experimenting with some Gorilla Glue, which dries clear and absolute rock hard, and taking the sort of wipe on and wipe off approach, it seems to give a really good finish. So I should be able to finish off anything that that looks a bit cruddy. Butt ring came up a bit better. It's still got crud on there. I need to clean it up. I think this is just dirt. I just need to clean it up. So I'm going to start on the handle now. So I've been sort of experimenting where is a good place, and this time, the thing that I really wanted to be aware of was actually if the reel was here. This is probably where I would put the reel. So this is the reel fitting. Got a reel, just want to get an idea. Then I think here might even be a little bit lower, but I think I'm going to take it to here, because that then gives me the opportunity to whip down here a little bit. And the reason why I need to whip down here is this is one that I've prepared earlier. This is actually my other Mach 2 Boron, which I got and was just trashed when I got it, and the tip was also broken off it, and I decided I was going to completely strip the blank back. And this is originally would have been a 3.9 13-foot rod. The tip has lost maybe to the first ring, so probably about 8-10 centimeters, 3-4 inches. And then also started to think about, well, if I've lost something on the end, the tip, I might as well lose something on the handle. So I'm actually going to cut the handle back to about here, knowing that this is roughly where it's going to end up. And yes, the handle's going to be shorter, the rod's going to be shorter. I mean, it will come in at about a 12-foot rod, I suppose, just over a 12-foot rod. I'm going to use it for canal fishing, so quite happy to do that, knowing that I'm going to get a really nice rod out of it. But what is interesting is, so these Mach 2 Boron rods were from an era at the very beginning of carbon fibre. They were made in Japan for Shakespeare. And I know that beside Shakespeare also had some salmon rods that were labelled up as being Boron, and I think also the company from Korea, Silstar, also had some Boron rods. But the handle shaft, if that's the right word to use, is fiberglass. So this is actually a fiberglass shaft which is gone inside the carbon fibre tube. I've got no idea where it ends. I mean, this is stiff as, but there's a step. So when I stripped this down, the end of the cork came to about here. So didn't know about it till I stripped it off, and then I come across this step. So that's the reason why, if I'm thinking this is the other rod, I'll strip it back, take it down to about here. I suppose I can do this. Right, take it down to about here, wherever. Yep, that'll be about right. This is my marker. I've got this here, right, so that's what I'm going to whip up. Put the hook keeper on here, and then this will be where I'll have that kind of whipping. And I'm only going to do really simple whipping. I keep on seeing these little sort of articles on some of the Facebook groups about all of the guys, especially in the US, that really like to do this sort of decorative whipping. Not really my kind of thing. And one of the things to bear in mind is the type of fishing that I do, you know, which is float fishing, you know, European, UK float fishing. I'm holding the rod, and actually I want that, and I'm holding the rod the whole time. Yeah, especially if I'm fishing a river, so I'm letting the float go down. I want the line to come off. I want actually a rod which is quite light, and this old rod is probably twice the weight of the current generations of rods for this kind of fishing. But I like it. I really like the action. But I think like putting on loads and loads of whipping and loads of seal on the sealant on the whipping, and then lots and lots of epoxy, it's going to add weight to it. So that's my argument. I'm going to stay with it. I'm going to carry on now and just get into taking the handle off, clean up the blank, and then I'll do that off camera because it's not really the most exciting thing, and I've already put another video up on how to do that, and then I'll come back on. Okay, been a few hours and I've done quite a lot. So this is the butt section. As you can see, I've cut the handle off completely, cleaned it all up. I mentioned previously about the fact that, you know, this is an older carbon fibre blank, and it's got this fiberglass insert. So I was applying some heat and scraping. I was really surprised at how much heat this fiberglass retained. Got to the point where I was a little bit worried that I didn't want the heat to do something where, you know, it might loosen something inside, because somewhere this carbon fibre and this fiberglass is obviously attached, probably using epoxy, the same stuff that will be on here, and you know, heat's gonna cause it to come loose. So I was a bit worried about that, so I ended up spending more time scraping. But I've got it to a point where, you know, obviously I'm happy enough with it. Cleaned up around here, the reel fitting fits on there pretty nicely. So cleaned out the inside, you know, with a bit of sandpaper to get a key in it, just so that the glue will just really help stick in it. Cleaned it out. That's all ready to go. I've cleaned up around the old rings as much as I dare. I had some problems, just wasn't happy with with scraping away too much and affecting it. As I mentioned, I'm at a place where I think that that's going to be good enough. The top piece of the handle, you know, which screws down, I had to ream that out. The diameter of this is about 14.5 mil. I was actually working with a set of calipers because I didn't want to keep on sliding this down, trying it, taking it off. To be honest, it's still a little bit of a tight fit, but I'm going to stay with it. I think I can work it down very slowly, especially when it's actually glued on this, so it's got some strength. So it's all ready to start to glue up and assemble. So that's what I'm going to do next, and start whipping on the eyes. Put this down here. It's number 4. The other thing which I did was I stripped all of the eyes off except for the tip, which I've decided I'm actually going to keep on there, simply because there's nothing wrong with it. I do have a replacement one which is part of the same Seymo setup, but this one's fine. And you know, it's on there, it's secure. There's no reason, I don't think, to take it off, except it all matches. This was really quite a challenge to get all of these little the smaller diameter ones off. Again, going back to the heat in the blank, in the fiberglass handle piece of the blank, I was really conscious that this is a splice tip rod, which means that the action of the rod is very much in this piece of fiberglass, which is spliced in here. So this is actually the carbon fibre boron, whatever you want to call it, and there is a noticeable step, which is actually where a ring sits, or sat and will sit, and then this becomes carbon fibre. This becomes fiberglass. So I was putting heat on this, trying to unpick the whippings, and I was just really conscious of it getting hot. So I ended up actually using this, which is a old dentist's tool for picking teeth. And my wife and I took a trip to Moscow a few years ago. We were walking around a second-hand market, and I bought a load of second-hand dentist gear for like nothing, because they just looked really useful, not for dentistry work but for other things. And this was so useful for actually getting underneath the thread, picking it out, and just it was down the side of the whipping and the base of the ring. So yeah, great. I kept the yellow gold whippings on there mainly because they were painful to take off, and they're all still on there. And I'm actually thinking I'm going to keep them on there and just whip between them and keep them. I think that makes a really good marker. They're on the middle section as well, except for one. So, you know, thinking that I'm going to keep it as is. Final thing is I've got all of the eyes rings that I took off. In the next video, I'm going to weigh them. I'm going to weigh them, and I'm going to compare them with the Seymo RDXs, just to sort of see what the difference is, see whether or not there really is that much of a difference, whether it really would upset the balance, etc. I don't know. Got to remember, you know, this is 40-year-old tech. The rings, I think, are titanium. If they're not, they are built by guides and blanks as being lightweight. So we'll see. The reason why I'm going to do it in a different video is because I've got to get my little scales out, and also I just figured it would be a nice just separate segment for other people to reference, rather than going all the way through this and listening to me waffle for the whole time.